Hello, good evening. Good evening, everybody. If we could gather and find a seat, make yourself at home. Welcome, welcome. We're so delighted that so many friends could come join us this evening, coming out in such inclement weather and so on. But you're not going to be disappointed. This is going to be one of the big evenings of your life. One of the best gigs you've ever attended, I promise. Just look at the lineup we have here for you. I mean, just to get the four of them all together in the same place is kind of miraculous. So it's going to be spectacular.
For now.
My name is Thomas Groom, and for many years around here I taught theology, but then everybody's forgotten me now because they gave me a day job about 10 years ago. And now I serve as the director of the Church in the 21st Century Center. Now, if you haven't heard of C21 before, you've at least heard of Agape Latte. That's probably the most popular program that we sponsor on campus. How many of you have been to Agape Latte events? Marvelous. And that's one of the best things that our center does. But then we do other good things besides. And one of the other best things we do is we publish this marvelous magazine. We publish it twice a year. Each semester. We call it Resources. And actually, this goes out to about 200,000 people. In other words, when you graduate from Boston College for the rest of your life, you will receive a copy of Resources magazine. We call it Resources because we want it to be helpful to people in a very particular way, and helpful especially by way of nurturing their spirituality and their life in faith. We take a particular issue for each copy of the mag for each semester, and this semester the topic is conscience, and not only conscience, but conscience especially in the context of young people's lives. As you put together your conscience at this point in time, and the psychologists and developmentalists say that now is the time that you put in place your conscience that will guide you for life. And I don't care how famous you become, how wealthy, what a great leader you become, and you all have that potential. The conscience that you form and decide upon now will be the rudder that will guide your life, and it will make a whale of a difference. I mean, the happiness you find will depend upon the kind of conscience you live by. So I really wasn't kidding when I said this could be one of the most important gigs that you'll ever attend at Boston College. For each unit, or for each issue rather, we pick a guest editor, and then they find the best essays available and weave them together into one issue. And for this particular topic, finding essays that would be helpful, especially to young people like yourselves, in nurturing your conscience and forming your conscience, there simply was nobody that we could possibly find that would do a better job than Mike Sacco. And Mike has done precisely what we asked him to do, put together a fantastic issue on this all-important topic. And then, as I said, we found three of the other Pied Pipers of the campus and invited them to join Mike on the panel this evening. And now, without further ado, let's welcome them all with a good round of applause.
Thank you, Tom. I especially want to start out by thanking all of you for coming out here in some snow and some ice. I recognize many, many faces, so I'm grateful to you if you're part of the programs that help sponsor this tonight, whether it be APA or the Freshman League or Ascend or all of the arms that we had to twist to get you to show up. From the bottom of my heart, thanks so much for showing up. What are we going to do here tonight? Well, Tom had mentioned and gave a little bit of framework to this magazine. So we're sort of at a magazine launch. I don't know if you've ever been to a magazine launch, but you're at one now. And the story behind this, and Tom's lovely, and I love his Irish brogue about how I was the best person that they could find to do this. Well, the truth is, I was the best person in a conference room that they could find to do this. I've been really lucky, and for about the last 10 or 11 years have been on various committees for the Church in the 21st Century. And as you probably are aware, through Agape Latte and Express Your Faith Week, they do a lot of things on campus for the undergraduates. But they do even more for the general church at large. And there's been this simmering conversation over the years of what can we do for the young adult population of the church. Each issue has a different kind of focus or a different theme. And for a number of years, we've been all kind of throwing around the ideas, what would really engage young people today? And me spending so much time with you all, oftentimes got tapped and said, well, Mike, what do you think of this? And what do you think of that? And I have to give you a little advice. be careful when you open your mouth at meetings. Because if you're not lucky, or if you are lucky, you'll end up being a guest editor of a magazine, which is what sort of happened. The folks came to me and they said, we'd like to do an issue on conscience, on character, on moral development of college students. And so Tom and Karen put me to work, and I went and I looked far and wide through database searches and all sorts of stuff to look at the accessible media and the accessible literature out there. And the truth was, there's not a lot out there. There's not a lot out for people like you, young adults, well-adjusted, normal, high-achieving people, to say, who are the people? What are the experiences? What are the lessons that help guide you and form who you are? And so I'm excited to say that I believe this issue of C21 Resources has more commissioned articles in it than any other that have come before, meaning that it was up to myself and Karen and Megan Krakowiak, who helped put this together, to kind of ask other people who we thought might be experts, not only on your lives, but experts of young people's lives in general. We sort of jokingly say that we've built this magazine as an issue for emerging adults and those who work with and love them. So you'll notice some of these articles will be straight over the plate toward you. We have an article from Bennett Johnson, who's sitting in the back. I'm sure we can get him a Sharpie and he can sign editions for you later. We have a couple graduate students at Boston College that chimed in. Carrie Cronin, myself, we wrote articles. We even went to Marquette and had the dean of the students at Marquette write an issue about student conduct and the influence on conscience, just to get a different voice from a different Jesuit perspective. Amongst that, you'll find other articles by David Brooks, a whole bunch of interesting things, some related to faith, some related to friendship, some related to making mistakes. And so our hope is that you take this with you as a lovely parting gift tonight. And it's something that you can sit with and pay attention to the experiences and the people and the faith lens that you bring to your own self-identity and development. Now, moving on, why are we here with these lovely people? Well, when we were sitting down and thinking, well, what can we do to really kick this thing off? I thought, I'm lucky enough to go on service trips, be involved in mentoring programs, travel the world with BC students. And I know that through classes and relationships and service, there's a number of conversation partners in your life. They not only lend you wisdom about conscience formation, they lend you wisdom on leadership. You see, I believe fully that BC is a place that develops you as a leader and as a person of character, a woman or a man for others. And so they asked me, well, who could we get to speak to the students? And I said, I can only think of the best three people on campus. Steve Pope from theology, Carrie Cronin from philosophy in the Lonergan Center, and Mary Troxel from philosophy. And they were very generous and have agreed to join us tonight to talk through the lens of conscience about this thing of leadership. Because as you see, especially in the world today, especially in your young lives, your careers, your campus groups, we need good, centered, moral, balanced leaders. So we hope to have a conversation with you tonight about that. How's this going to work? Well, I'm going to sit over here and try not to break the chair, which I almost broke it when I sat in a minute ago. It's a cheap chair. And we've asked our three guests to prepare kind of some opening statements on one aspect of leadership. We've asked Steve to talk about conscience, we've asked Mary to talk about service, and we've asked Carrie to talk about relationships. I then have a question for them, and I'll moderate a little back and forth for us, but we really want you to be involved. So I'll kick this off. We'll share some of our insights, but if we are really going to do our job tonight, I hope you can sit there and think of some questions and think of some things to engage with the panel. Sound good? All right, let's do this. Is my microphone working? There we go. So Steve's agreed to talk about conscience. I think he's even written a book about that recently. So I will turn it over to Professor Pope. Let's give it a round of applause for Professor Pope.
I didn't write a book about it. I did write a chapter of a book.
Oh, there you go. Sorry.
But it's a very complicated topic. Professors always begin every talk with that comment. But it is a very complicated and fraught topic, conscience. But I think it might be the most important topic you can ever talk about in ethics, because it's about how you live your lives and how you make decisions in your life. On what basis do you make these decisions? about how you live, about how you love, about who you're living with, about how you treat people, especially people that are on the margins, that tend to be invisible to many other people. So I'm going to talk about leadership and conscience, and I want to argue or present the idea that there are two kinds of leaders, two ways of describing what good leadership is. But the important one is one in which leaders are operating out of a mature, developed conscience. So one notion of leadership is efficiency. You say leadership is the ability to get people together and to mobilize them to achieve a goal. And it takes a lot of skill. If there's a big goal, a lot of organization, accomplishment of tasks, and so forth. And we praise leadership a lot. You see all these books in the airport about leadership in business and how to be the best leader you can be and 10 steps to become a better leader. But what we often don't notice is that there's an assumed value placed on leadership, that leadership is a good thing. But the fact is, most of the world's greatest evils have come from good leaders. People that are very intelligent and were able to mobilize other people to do terrible things to other people. So a dumb person can only do a limited amount of damage. But a really smart person with malevolent goals can get a lot of people to do terrible things. We saw this in the killing fields in Cambodia. We saw it in the Holocaust. We've seen it in the dictatorships of Latin America in the 80s that killed hundreds of thousands of people. So leadership can be constructive or destructive. It can facilitate good or evil. So we have to demythologize leadership. And we have to ask instead, what is a good leader who isn't just efficient? The way Eichmann was efficient as the architect of the Holocaust. He had no conscience. All he had was careerism. Get ahead. Make your way. Don't pay attention to human suffering. That's other people's problems. So I want to say that another way of understanding good leadership is the leadership of good people. Morally good leadership, which is basically made possible by people who are trustworthy, because trust elicits action. Trustworthiness elicits trust. And to have trustworthiness, you have to be a person of integrity. Then we have the problem of dirty hands. How can you get ahead in politics, in business, in the professions, without compromising your moral ideals and principles every step of the way? The farther you climb to the top, the less of a conscience you have left. I think that prospect is very scary. It's very real for us today. And I hope one of the things that BC can help us do is form consciences so that we're in organizations. We don't just conform to the drift toward selfishness and opportunism. So good leadership is one in which people can be mobilized to a common good that they buy into because they see that it is good. It can be done in a corporation as much as it can be done in an NGO. So I think good leadership in this sense has two characteristics. One is the person has to be competent and conscientious, has to be good at what they do efficiently. But secondly, they have to be people with well-formed consciences, because conscience is just as ambivalent as leadership. And I'm not sure who does more damage, the Eichmann with no conscience or the Cromwell with a righteous conscience. Cromwell is the Lord Protector of England who decimated the Irish people and was quite brutal in destroying Catholics who he considered to be in league with the Antichrist. So how can we have something other than a fanatical conscience and consciencelessness leadership? So for me, most of our conscience is formed by our communities, by where we're raised, by who raises us, by our family, our friends, our neighbors, our teachers, our coaches. And we absorb their moral messages like a sponge absorbs water as little kids. Part of the point of education is to get you to decide from the menu of items you've been given, what do you want to select as what you want to be living by? What's your personal moral code? Because now is when, as Tom was saying, now is when you appropriate yourselves as adult moral agents. So we have to ask, what communities have formed me to be the kind of person I am, and what communities in the future do I want to be part of that will help me become the person I want to be? Because you don't decide I'm going to be a certain kind of person by flipping a switch. You decide, I want those as my friends. I want to work in that organization. I want to be with those people because I like those people. They bring out the best in me. Avoid like the plague the people that bring out the worst of you, because you will become like them. So to close, 4 traits of a conscientious, morally formed leader. And I think really it's for any human life, not just for leaders, for any person. If we want to have an adult conscience that's worthy of respect, number 1, we have to have a profound allegiance to the truth. We have to respect the truth above all, whatever the cost. We have to fight our tendency to rationalize and to deceive ourselves. Number 2, we have to have a commitment to justice and the common good, recognizing all people have equal dignity, not just my insiders, my friends, my tribe. Number 3, we have to have a commitment to personal integrity, that what we do in our lives matches what we say we believe in, that what we think and what we feel are one, and not to tolerate hypocrisy in ourselves. And number 4, all that, I think, has to be wrapped in a cloth of compassion. A conscience without compassion is a moral hazard, no matter how just, how much integrity, how honest, because it's compassion that makes us human. Compassion lets us to reach out to people and to identify with them, empathize with them, and recognize when we make moral decisions, we're affecting other lives that value just as much as we do. That's my short take on conscience.
Thanks, Steve. I think that Professor Propp brings up some very important themes when it comes to how conscience informs leadership. As I look around our community here at Boston College, I see service as another big pivotal pillar of which the BC experience is built on. So we've invited Professor Mary Troxell to talk about leadership through that lens of service.
Thank you. I'm going to share a couple points. Woo! And the first one is not really my insight. It came from a conversation I had with a few former Root service leaders. So Frank, I see you here, and Christopher, who's graduated. But the insight is this, that the true service leadership is not about leading from the front. It's not about leading from behind. It's about leading from the middle. And I think this is a wonderful way of articulating the experience of accompaniment. And we talk about that a lot in service, but I think you could just as easily talk about it in service leadership. Christopher, he shared with me that the most surprising thing for him about being a leader of the Arupe group was that the relationship he had with the group was not primarily a relationship of respect. It was much deeper than that. It was a relationship of a kind of mutual belonging to one another. It's what Gregory Boyle calls kinship. And if this is true, if this is what the relationship involves, then being a service leader is not simply about sharing your competencies or your strengths. It's about sharing all of yourself. And that takes tremendous courage. There's a woman, Rachel Remen, and she writes a lot about service. And one of the things she says is that in serving, our limitations serve, our wounds serve, even our darkness serves. And I think that's true about service leadership as well. So I teach Pulse, and in Pulse we have a Pulse Council, which are students who were prior, they did Pulse the year before, and they serve as leaders to current students who are taking Pulse. And when students apply for the position of Pulse Council, a lot of times they're under the misperception that a really good Pulse Council applicant is somebody who just kicked butt at their placement. It was easy for them. They had a talent. They were the favorite person that their supervisor ever had. When in fact, some of the strongest, really the most wonderful Pulse Council members are the students who really struggled in their placements, who, you know, they were frustrated a lot. They didn't get along with their supervisor. Maybe they felt despair. And the reason why is because those are the students that can really accompany other students who are going through similar experiences. So the second thing I want to share, and I'm going to be brief about this, but I think it's important and it relates to conscience, and maybe it's more controversial, but the notion of being a service leader, you need compassion. But compassion is not the same as trying to protect the people you care about from pain. And I would argue that some of the most important, most transformational work that's done in service is a result of experiencing a great deal of pain. And as a service leader, not only should you not protect people from pain, but maybe even push on the bruise a little bit. Because a lot of the pain that comes from service is about our consciences being awakened. It's experiences such as, I didn't realize people could suffer this much. The experience, I didn't realize the world was so broken. Or more frighteningly, I didn't realize how complacent I've been in the face of the brokenness or the injustice of the world. And to be a strong service leader is to allow people to experience that pain and to metabolize that pain, to metabolize those experiences. So those experiences really can sear people's conscience, one's conscience, and can lead to a new sense of responsibility and calling.
Thank you, Mary. And last, we've asked Professor Cronin to speak about relationship, which I think is so important because nothing's really done in a vacuum. These experiences you're having on campus, these experiences through service, all of these things that lend to your formation of conscience, it's done in context of others. So, Carrie, would you like to speak about relationships?
Sure. Hello, everyone. I want to join everybody in thanking you for coming out tonight, and my students will get their extra credit points. So, more about that. I hope you're also noticing that we're trying to keep our comments pretty short, and I think you probably know us well enough to know that each of the four of us could talk on and on and on and on. So we're trying to keep these comments short so that we can have a conversation with you guys. So I'm going to say something about leadership, and then I'm going to pose some questions about relationships rather than give you an answer about relationships. So here it comes. So, and I'm going to say some things that overlap a little bit with what's already been said. When I think of leadership at BC, I often say, and I think I said it to this panel when we were talking about this, sometimes at BC I want to say, I'm so tired of leadership programs. I really would like some programs for followers. Mm-hmm. Because at BC, you know, you're all leaders, you're fabulous, you're so great, whatever. And we know you are, but sometimes, and I think in the past week or two, or the past year or two, a lot of us have been wondering about how do you be a good follower? Like, what does it mean to follow well when there is good or bad leadership in front of you? And how do you sort of find that middle to accompany people when the leadership that you see is not maybe living up to the way, you know, is not a type of leadership that you would necessarily like to follow. How to live well through that with each other. But in light of that, I was thinking over the weekend about, for me, the difference between a good leader and a great leader. Not a good and a bad leader, but what's the difference between a good leader and a great leader? And it boils down to this for me. I think, and I get this a little bit from some writing of Bernard Lonergan, a great philosopher and theologian and Jesuit, who said this: a person who's trying to develop any sort of good, any good that she perceives worthwhile, does that in two different ways. She does that in terms of creating and healing, right? And creating, Lonergan says, and I won't get too far into it because it would take too long, it would take 700 pages. Lonergan says, creating is what a leader does when she's trying to understand what's worthwhile and what's worth pursuing. And healing is when she's loving what's worthwhile and worth pursuing. And Lonergan says that I think he would propose that a good leader does one of those two things, either creates or heals. And I think this is in agreement with what you were proposing, Steve. A good leader might be somebody who just loves other people well, right? I think of the leadership in my family of both of my grandmothers, right? And yet a leader might be somebody who's just really creative and effective and efficient and has a great vision and a great idea for leadership. But a great leader does both. A great leader understands what's worthwhile to pursue and loves what is worthwhile in what she leads or serves, right? She has the capacity to love that well. So if that's the case, what we can do here at Boston College in emerging leadership programs and the alphabet soup of programs that we run here about making you all leaders. You were all leaders in high school. Now you're leaders here. You're going to be leaders out there. But I got to tell you this. Of those two things, creating and healing, understanding and loving what's worthwhile, I think we can do a lot to teach you about how to do that first thing, understanding what's worthwhile. You can take great courses on understanding what's worthwhile, what's worth pursuing, what needs to be solved in the world, what needs you to pay attention and think more deeply and more responsibly about how to move forward. But I don't think we can teach you how to do that second thing. We cannot teach you how to love well. That, as I think everybody's pointed out so far, that's done in relationship work. You can't learn it alone. You can't learn it with a book. You have to learn it in relationship. We can maybe set the conditions by sending you on a service trip, having you live with your friends. We can help you. We can set the conditions for you to become a more loving person, to grow your capacity to love better, to love more expansively, more inclusively, more responsibly. But we can't make you do it. In the end, this is something that you have to do in your relationships. And I'm going to say something right now, which is, I debated for a long time whether or not to say this. I've known so many wonderful students here at Boston College in the past 21 years of working here. And I've met amazing leaders on this campus. People I think who can really be creative and loving, right? And it's important, as I said, because if you do one, right, a creative leader can fall in love with her own ideas so much that she can't even love the people she serves or accompany them in any authentic way. But a person who's very loving can sometimes be ineffectual or shallow in her leadership. And I got to say this. I've met some Boston College students. It's not my common experience, but it's also not rare to find students who are involved in leadership programs here who I would say have ice in their veins. And I'm just going to let that sit for just like 5 seconds, because during the Q&A, you can tell me the camera's on. You can tell me to stop saying that. But I got to say, it's very eerie to meet people, students or otherwise, who want to be leaders and have every intention of being leaders and even have the skills, the strategies, and the ideas they need to be leaders, and yet have no compassion, seemingly no capacity to love and to be in relationships. And that, to me, is terrifying. So I want to just wrap up with 2 ideas. If, as Pope Francis says, to the idea of conscience, Pope Francis says that developing my conscience involves a certain amount of waking up, right? It's sort of a waking up. And it's not a one-time thing. It's not a flip the switch. It's a waking up every day to the beauty and the joy and the suffering and the despair of other people. And we can't always wake ourselves up. We need relationships where other people help us to wake up. Other people wake our conscience up to be able to really learn how to love. I often tell my students at the beginning of the year in perspectives, on the one hand, you know how to read already, and you know how to write. But you don't know how to read and write when you come to Boston College as a freshman. You need to learn how to read better and write better. We also need to learn how to be better friends, better boyfriends, better girlfriends, and better colleagues. If I haven't learned how to be a better friend since I met Mary Troxell 20 years ago, I'm just an idiot, right? Like, this woman makes me better. These two guys make me a better person. But I have to learn how to be better in relationships. And that means being awakened by the wonderfulness of someone else. And so I just want to end with this, that when I read a great biography of Pope Francis, and in it I was really struck by a story that one of the seminarians told, a seminarian who worked with him when he was the vocation director for the Jesuits in South America. And this priest said, when I was a seminarian working with him, he would always say to us, we're going to study theology this afternoon, but what I want you to do this morning is to go out into the neighborhoods, out into the barrios, and find out what people need from you first. Then come back and we'll study doctrine and we'll study theology. Because you have to be awakened by other people first to learn how to heal and love, to heal and create as a great leader. Thanks.
When we were putting the panel together, we wanted it to sort of reflect a bit of the style of the magazine and the issue. And it's no secret to you, you're here because you already know that we have 3 of the best professors at Boston College. They're excellent in the classroom. They're really skilled at passing along ideas and concepts. And you'll find articles in the magazine that are like that. But we also didn't want to let them get off the panel until we could hear from them as excellent leaders. Because I know all 3 of them, and I can tell you beyond being great scholars, they're great people. So I wanted to ask the panel one question to sort of make the idea of leadership and conscience tangible. And I point that out because that's what we've tried to do also in the article, that there'll be some, or in the issue, there'll be some magazines or some articles that are more intellectual, more conceptual, and there'll be some that people just write from the heart. So I've asked my colleagues the following question, and I would invite them to respond to it in an abbreviated way, because we do want to have time for you all to ask questions. But I pose the question, can you think of a time in your life that you've faced a leadership dilemma? That leadership role could be a professional role, it could be a role as a parent or a friend or a member of any type of community. How did your conscience or the formation of your conscience, how did service, or perhaps how did relationships help you as you tried to solve that leadership problem that you faced? We can go in any order that you'd want.
Okay. So it's funny, I was department chair in theology, but I had no leadership dilemmas there. I really didn't. I didn't find any great moral dilemmas. They're very good people, and for the most part, 99%, very reasonable people. But I find in my marriage, family, personal life, dilemmas all the time. I don't know what that says about me.
Or your family.
My family. Yes. But I'll give you a really small one, but it might be, I'm trying to figure out what would be relevant to you guys. So one of the big dilemmas of my life, actually 2 involve BC, but maybe I'll briefly say 2. The first one was, I was a high school teacher, and everybody was telling me I should go to law school. And law is noble. My father's a lawyer. You could do a lot of good. I was thinking civil rights. I'll be a campaigner for civil rights. That would be great. I'm from California. I was very interested in the the farm workers. Cesar Chavez was kind of using King's mobilization tactics and nonviolent resistance. I really admired that. And I had my Jesuits in my high school were like, whipping us all up. It was great. But I love theology. And I've always thought, if there is a God, it's a pretty big deal. And we should make God what God is, if we take God seriously. But everybody was telling me, go to law, you're really be good at law, you like to argue, and you could do good too and make money. So what's not to love? But there was something in me just really hankering to give theology a try. So the dilemma was, do I go to law where everybody's telling me? And I usually listen when everybody's saying something. I usually listen to them. But I had in myself this passion. And the person I probably admired most in my life, my grandfather, took me to the car wash. That was where we always had our talks, at the car wash. The car's being washed, and he's doing this grandfatherly advice. He says, you should definitely go to law school. And I just told him I wanted to go to grad school and see what it's like. He said, you'll never make a living. You'll be starving. You'll never get a job. He was a college professor of math, so he wasn't just making it up. I said, I see people working and they're eating. Something's happening. Let me try it. So it was a very hard dilemma for me to break away from what the man who I loved dearly, who taught me how to drive, how to throw a baseball, everything, to say, no, I can't do it. And he was crestfallen. But I took the chance and I said, I'm going to try it for a year, and if I don't love it to death, I'm not going to do it. That was the first year, and I'm now in year 38 of theology. I did love it. And it rewarded me with the feeling of peace of mind when I decided to do that. I had what the Jesuits called consolation. I was consoled in the idea of doing it, and it paid off. And I think it's made all the difference in my life. Second dilemma, real quick. I was at Boston College about 10 years ago, 15 years ago, and I was offered a really nice job. I was offered an endowed chair at Georgetown University where I would teach one course a semester. And it would have a secretary, incredible research funds. It was a great opportunity. And my first feeling was, right on.
Yeah.
The Lord giveth, and the Lord has not taken away. I was really happy. I was like bouncing off the walls. I was so happy about it. And then it sort of settled down. I said, well, something's not right. And I had talked to my family. They were all saying, yes, go. Let's all go to Washington. And I looked at them and I thought, you know what? They're all happy. They're happy. They have their friends. My wife has meaningful work at BC High. I love BC. Why would I want to go? Because I'm really happy here. So yes, I would go. It's a boost, but who needs the boost? So I had to kind of say to my ego, get back in your box, relax. You're not in charge. So the dilemma was between my immediate desire, my ambition, which we all have in this room, my ambition, and my recognition that when I make a decision, I have to make a decision for all of us, with all of us in the family, not for all of us in the family. So the transition from with to for was part of the formation of my conscience, really. I should have figured it out a long time ago, like not when I was 30. But nevertheless, I did get it eventually. So the with and for transition was important. And actually, I think that works in a lot of other fields as well, to bring people along and say, everybody affected counts, not just one person. So
Thank you.
I made a good decision. And I'm glad I've got great BC students like those in this room. So thank you.
Next. My story, I have lots of crises in leadership or crises in conscience, but I'm going to talk about one that happened when I was in college. And it's when I was in college, with a bunch of friends of mine, we decided that we wanted to do some kind of service work. And there was a Cambodian community that was close to our school that we didn't have any relationship with. The school didn't have any connections with. So we developed a relationship with this community, and the idea is we would go in and be conversation partners and help them learn English, et cetera, et cetera. And so I'd go every week and I'd meet with this woman, and as these things go, you talk about very quotidian things typically. You know, how was your day? What do you like to do? What are your hobbies? But at one point, the woman that was my conversation partner, who I grew to adore, I adored her at this point, just kind of put down, she didn't want to talk about casual stuff. And she basically said something like, I'm working 2 jobs. She was working, 2 full-time jobs. And if I remember correctly, they were going to change her hours at one of her jobs. And so she wouldn't be able to work both of them. And her husband was sick. And her husband was in charge of taking care of the kids. And he was having a hard time doing this because he really needed some medical help. And it just kept coming. She just kept talking about these challenges. And I listened to her, and I thought, you're screwed, basically. Pardon my French. I thought, I don't know. Not only do I know what I can do to help you, but I don't know what anybody can do to help you. I can't imagine what's going to make this different. And I felt so ashamed of that feeling. It's a terrible feeling to think I was thinking my head, the bubble over my head was saying your situation's hopeless. And here I was, part of this group that I was supposed to help them, navigate this service program. So I think, and I found this in my life, that when I have a crisis of conscience, it's always in conversation with others. And I had a conversation with another woman that was part of this group, and I told her, I don't know what we're doing. I don't know what good we're doing. And it takes, I was very ashamed of these feelings. I was very ashamed that I felt that her case was hopeless. I mean, I'm ashamed now thinking about it. But I was very naive in how I thought about service. And in conversations with her, I realized that the way that we thought about service was a little problematic. The way we were going about service was a little problematic. That there were so many things about our approach that was misguided. And here I was supposed to be sort of spearheading this, and being a leader. And so through these conversations, it's the kind of thing that I think the way conscience works sometimes is a seed is planted in you and it grows. And you keep returning to the same thing over and over and over again. And your insights kind of grow. And sort of through our discussions, I realized that, again, that I was rather naive. And a lot of what my impetus to service was a little ego-driven. And that proper service isn't really done in a vacuum. We were kind of doing it in a vacuum. And we came to the decision that, and at the same time, there was sort of a lot of people in this group were having a hard time, that we would find other ways to serve this community. And it turns out they had a relationship with a church that was much more effective in doing much better things than what we were doing, and we kind of let it go. But the thing is, if I didn't have somebody that I felt comfortable saying things that I was very ashamed of thinking, much less saying out loud, I never would have been able to process what was going on. And what's more, what my friend did is she affirmed that the impetus inside me was good. There was something good in there that made us want to do the work we were doing. That was good and that was useful, and we could do something with that. But the ways we were going about it was that we just were sort of in over our heads, and we're a little bit arrogant about, we thought, oh, we want to fix the world, and the world is out there, and here we are, we're going to fix it. We kind of had a naive understanding. And I think about that example all the time. I think about it today because I find to this day I can fall into the same traps of thinking of service being about ego instead of about self-gift. But again, it tends to happen in conversation. I think that's why when you talk about the importance of relationship, that's why the relationships are so important.
Thank you, Mary.
I'm just going to say really quickly that I have a dilemma every Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday, because that's my teaching schedule. I have a dilemma every class that I teach in the Perspectives program. And the dilemma is rooted in the fact, it's rooted in two things. The dilemma is, how do I make sure, and I do it sometimes, some days better than others. I'm looking at some of my former students. The dilemma is, do I love my students more than I love these books? And the problem for me is that, A, I really love the books a lot. Like a lot. And
They don't love you back.
I know they don't love.
problem.
I think sometimes they do. But the second thing is that I have a personality flaw. I tend to, my students can affirm this, I tend to like power a little. And I have an ego, and these people can affirm that up here. And my dad was a Marine, and so I kind of like that, like, you know, I can get a little taken with it. So I have to struggle with that all the time. It's a constant dilemma for me to make sure, and I pray to the Holy Spirit a lot about this, to make sure that I love my students and what's moving forward with my students more than I love the ideas and the books and the class dynamic of me being in charge. I have to really work on that. So every Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, I have a dilemma, and I try to resolve it through relationships with my students that remind me what it's about.
Thank you, Kara. Many of you are familiar with our pocket guide to Jesuit education that calls you as students to be attentive and be reflective and be loving. So we're going to shift the conversation over to you, and I want you to take a moment and to be attentive and reflective. And by that I mean, you've heard a few concepts today, you've heard a few stories today. What really stood out for you and what the panel shared? And what parts of what they said comforted you, made you feel that consolation that Steve mentioned? Or what ideas maybe challenged you? The way that you can be loving is to be like these three people. They have been very generous with us tonight. So I'd ask that you can show some love and generosity and take a moment, and then we have folks that have microphones for your questions. We'd love to hear from you. The only caveat is that I ask that you just ask the folks on the panel questions one at a time. Don't ask the entire panel, because we'd like to get as many students who can participate as we can. So who's got something on their mind? There we go.
Thank you. Hello? Hi. So I'm going to dial the heat up a little bit here. And
You always do that, Joe.
and I'm not trying to put you on like the political hot seat, but if we're talking about moral leadership, I would just love to hear your takes on Trump. And I understand that most people in this room might not agree with his policy decisions, but are there takeaways from Trump's leadership ability or anything redeemable in that department? Thank you.
Ask Mary Troxel.
No. Really?
Yeah,
I'm going to answer
you're
it?
you're the Schopenhauer scholar. I think this is very applicable.
Nice,
Right.
exactly.
Yeah. Yeah, okay.
Is his name Joe?
Let me
Joe.
think. Let me think.
So, yeah, he does that. I had him for a whole year. He did it to every class.
You know?
I
loved
think whatever we say about our president, what I think is clear is that people have a hard time disagreeing with him. In the Republican Party, in the Democratic Party, I think he's a difficult person to challenge. And I think I'm not a big fan of that kind of leadership, because I think it's very dangerous not to have somebody pushing back against you when you're a leader. of a country. I mean, I think it's important that people feel comfortable sort of checking you and saying, I'm not sure if this is right or this is wrong. And the fact that there's very little dissension, and when there is dissension, he tends to be very biting. I think that's unfortunate. I wish he were more open to the voices of those who say he's falling short. And for me, the question, again, is about my conscience. I'm not comfortable with Trump as the president, and I have to ask myself what to do about it. And I have to ask myself, how do I talk about it in a way that is inclusive and generous? I don't have a monopoly on the truth. I don't have a monopoly on morality. What I say or what I think, even my dearest convictions, I can be wrong. I found that that's the thing about being old. It's humbling because you're amazed at how often that the things you think you're most sure about, you tend to be not sure about. That's where I'm at. That's what I feel comfortable saying.
Can I say something real quick?
That means.
Because I was half joking, but so sorry, Mary, I put you
Yeah.
on the spot like that. But it seems to me that the Donald Trump phenomenon is an example of the first kind of leadership, good leadership as efficient. And he blew all the predictions. And his phenomenon, force of nature really, about how he uses social media and taps into the psyche of a pretty significant part of the American public that has felt left out and abandoned and that had not been addressed properly by the Democratic Party. However, I think we have to look at the second kind of leadership, and that requires the commitment to justice, compassion, personal integrity, and a relentless commitment to the truth. And I don't think he has any of those four, and I am certain about that. I don't share Mary's humility about this if it goes to those principles. And I think he's a moral hazard for this country. And I have the most grave worries about what's going to happen to us in the world and to our people, and especially people who are the most vulnerable in our midst.
Another question over here.
Yeah, I had a question back here. I think slivers of what each of you said really stuck with me in terms of Professor Pope, you talking about with and for, and Professor Cronin talking about creating and healing. And I think, Professor Truxell, I think something that really hit me was metabolizing pain. And I think we have a lot of opportunities to be awakening our conscience here, and whether it be through classes or volunteer organizations or service trips. And I think a common emotion I've been feeling with some of my peers as of late is, what do we do with that in order to metabolize that pain in the state that we're in? Especially, I'm a sophomore, so talking about, I think it's easier sometimes for seniors to say, like, okay, in terms of vision, saying, okay, after this is something that drives me in the future, or that will drive my vision. And I think a common feeling is kind of the combination of feeling stuck and restless in this community where we're able to have a lot of these conversations, but sometimes not able to take action on them. So I'm curious as to your thoughts on kind of combining passions and these moments of awakening your conscience with vision and vocation. So I'm wondering if someone can talk about that.
Wow.
Big one.
Great question.
You me? Oh, okay.
See, what we don't know, we always look at Mary. That's what happens.
That's a very good question. I think one thing that I would say is, here's a danger. I'll just put a danger out there that I've seen, is students feel much more comfortable thinking about their conscience in terms of things far away and in other places than they feel on BC's campus. And I think one way to start is, first of all, making connections. I think the connection always has to be made between love and justice. So when your conscience is stung and you're thinking about, I care, I hate this suffering, something has to be done, to think on both levels. to think about what institutions are fostering suffering and addressing those, as well as thinking about personal relationships. But I also think it has to happen on Boston College's campus. If you hate racism in the Dominican Republic, you hate racism on this campus. If you hate, and I could go on and on about this, I think that we have to do better at paying attention to what's going on all around us. And part of that is getting involved and listening to people that are outside of the people that you being open to the greater Boston College community, expanding your community of what you consider your community at Boston College.
Yes. Question in the back.
Hi. Professor Cronin, you mentioned some of these leaders that you've come across. You said having ice in their veins. And as a freshman who's gone through some of the preliminary experience with applying things and becoming rejected, what advice do you have for the freshman or sophomore or even junior that's going to be applying for service organizations or leadership positions in these service organizations and ultimately be rejected?
I know. Oh, tough it out. No, really. So the thing I forgot to say, which thanks for giving me the opportunity to say it now, I hope this answers your question, is this. I had said I was going to ask some questions of you guys, and I really want to do that. And to this point is, look, and I hope you got the message in me talking about my dilemma in teaching class, that I have ice in my veins too, which may be why I recognized those students. But as you're sort of moving through the programs at BC and the leadership roles, and not everybody, people getting rejected for roles and put off or sort of battered about, I think one of the things to do, to be active about, is to think about, look, what are the kinds of conversations that I wish Donald Trump had had in college? What are the kinds of friendships that or friendship work that I need to do now that I would want the General Secretary of the United Nations to do? You know what I mean? Or what kinds of conversations and friendship work and relationships do I think somebody in a leadership role who's really being a great leader, what are the kinds of relationship work and kinds of conversations what would be formative to them, right? So here's the thing. You might not get chosen for a service trip or a leadership role or a dance organization or showdown or whatever the amazing thing is, but you are a roommate and you are a friend and you are a classmate and a colleague at your work or at your Pulse placement. You are a sibling and a cousin or an aunt and an uncle, and right there is where you can be doing the relationship work and having the kinds of conversations that will make you more capable, that will grow your capacity to love and have a vision of what is worthwhile and what's worthwhile to pursue.
Thanks. Thank you, Kara. We want to be attentive to time, so perhaps we have chance for just one more. I saw your hand first. Yes, sir. Frank.
Hi, Frank.
Hello. One of my questions is thinking about a lot of what you said, a lot of going into what it means to have a conscience or to be a leader and partake in service on campus, is the idea of being attentive to yourself and personal self-reflection along the way. And that's one of the ways that I found that I've been able to grapple with a lot of these questions. But I know sometimes students and myself, especially when I was a freshman or sophomore in particular, I really struggled with how to have these personal introspective moments when it wasn't in a Fort Boston reflection or in my Root Bay reflection or in a more concrete way where it felt like the structures were there for me to have this sort of reflective experience. And maybe if Professor Pope, I'll pose it to you since you're the theologian on the panel. If you have any suggestions on way that students can integrate reflection into their daily lives at BC that aren't necessarily the traditional ways, of just sitting back in your room and taking 10 minutes out of your day, but maybe something that's more of a more subtle way to reflect that kind of reminds you of these ideas all the time.
Do a daily examine. Make friends with people that are thoughtful, mature, and self-critical. Challenge yourself to get out of your bubble, your comfort zone, in whatever way that is. Major in theology.
Absolutely. Thank you, everyone. You're quite generous.
Wonderful, wonderful evening. And look, at so many people here have talked about relationship and the importance of conversation. Here's a great way to show people you love them. Take a copy home to somebody you love and create a conversation around. Read an essay in here. Read my essay, for example, in here. and I think you'll create a conversation. Let's hear another round of applause for our wonderful panel.
Thank you. That was fun.